This is June the 6th, 1986. Bernice Jackson interviewing Cassius C. LaMunyon. Cash, tell me when and where you were born.
Well, I was born in Laverne, Oklahoma. I guess about 3 miles west of Laverne there. And 52525.
That's when you were born.
Yes.
525?
52525.
That would be May.
May the 5th, 1925.
And you lived there for how long do you, at Laverne?
Well, we lived in Laverne all through the dirt storm years.
That'd be up in the 30s.
Well, it was either 30 till 36 or 37, somewhere in that area. And my dad had when he got married, he married Rosie Brown at that time, and she had her mother, and they just lived out there in Coronado, California. And they kept after us to go out there. But actually, we was making more money here. We was making better living because we was buying candy for 40 cents a box and taking it to all these sales. Everybody was leaving at them times. There was no, at the livestock auctions, they didn't have no lunches or anything, so we just had candy. So we sold them Woodard every Friday and Beaver every Wednesday.
Well, I had never heard of it.
We never missed. We did that for, I don't know, maybe 5 years.
And what years would that be in?
Well, that would have been about 5 years before we actually left. So
And that would be...
probably 33 through, in them areas in there.
Through 37. And you made quite a bit of money? You made your
Well,
living
we'd make
that way?
80, we'd make about, sell between 80 and 100 boxes of candy a day.
Wow.
And we'd get 40 cents a box for it, and we'd get, well, we didn't eat, and we'd get $1.20 out of it. Nickel, we'd sell for nickel a bar.
Well, all right, let's go back. Tell me about your father's, give me your father's name.
Well, my father's name was Willis Clark LaMunyon.
And your mother's name?
Was Marty Lee O'Neill.
Okay, let's tell me about your father's people now.
Well, I believe they come in from Tennessee, or they come from France, but then they come to New York, and then I think these Tennessee, and then from Nebraska. And then they come to Woodard, Oklahoma, and they rented the Boiling Springs. They had a chance to buy it, but nobody had any money, and they lived on that and farmed it for several years.
Out here at Boiling Springs
Boiling
Park?
Springs, They was LaMunyons. Before it was even a state park or anything, it was just best farmland I ever seen, but they claimed they'd be walking behind a walking plow, and the snakes' water moccasins would be thicker than the dirt.
Well, that would be scary.
That's what they said. And then I think from there, then they went on out there to Madison. And
what did they raise out here at Boiling Springs? Do you remember?
Well, they had a bunch of cattle, but I don't know. I don't know what they raised at that time.
Do you remember anything about the Boiling Springs?
No, I don't even remember even being there.
Well, of course you weren't there, but I thought maybe you'd remember them.
No, I never did ever hear them say.
And so they went on out to.
Well, I think they probably went to, I don't know where, my grandpa, he went to Madison, but I don't, and his family, but I don't know how many LaMunyons was here at that time, I don't know.
What was your grandpa's name?
Well, Silas Lee was my grandpa's name, was my grandpa.
And did he farm out there at Madison?
Well, I really don't know. He was right across from Del Armstrong's, east. And that's where they had the dugout, that place.
And that was his filing place?
Right.
Well, that would be, at the present time, would be about a mile north of Slapout.
Well, yeah.
Somewhere in there. And now tell me about your mother's people.
Well, see, there'd be Grandpa Jim O'Neill, him and Uncle Ollie O'Neill. They probably come from Tennessee back in there, and they freighted all through this country here. And from what he had told me, and some of his kids had told me, that they liked they got this land. I think they just homesteaded or squatted on this piece of land out there. It was along the river, Guywall Creek there. And they squatted on it, and they liked it, and the grass was pretty good at that time.
And what was your grandfather's name?
Well, it was Jim O'Neill.
Jim O'Neill.
Jim O'Neill.
Jim O'Neill is your grandfather.
Yeah, he's my grandfather. See, Uncle Ollie is Alice's dad.
Yes.
And see, and he homesteaded in there.
And those two men were brothers.
Brothers,
Jim
yeah.
and Ollie.
Uh-huh. I know Grandpa used to tell me, that'd be that'd be Jim O'Neill.
Yes.
He used to tell me that Jesse James and Frank James used to come out there, and he would give them new horses. They would trade the horses with them.
Well.
And he said, claimed with one story he told me, I never did forget. He said that one day Frank and Jesse come out and they wanted some new mounts, and somebody had stole all of Grandpa's horses. And so he told the James boys if they happened to see these horses, well, I'd send them back. So out in New Mexico somewhere, there was a Mexican that had these horses. And so they turned around and had them back. My grandpa asked him, well, what'd you do with the Mexican? Well, he said, there's an old wagon there, and he said, we just hung him on the tongue of the wagon. And about 3 weeks later, my grandpa said the horses came back after Jesse had been there and Frank.
Is that right?
Well, they claim it's a true story. And
Uh-huh.
I mean, Alice said it was too, so.
Yes. Well, how did they give their right names to your grandfather?
Yeah,
They told
Frank and Jesse James. See, Grandpa, he was a good, honest man, and he didn't have no beef with them.
Yes.
See, that was a no man's land, and anybody could come in that territory, and they had never done him any harm, Grandpa, and he'd trade them horses, and he'd always pay.
Yes.
And he'd always have grub there.
And they would eat.
They would eat, and they were just, and they didn't have a bit of trouble.
And I suppose your grandpa knew that they were robbers and would rob?
Well, I doubt if they knew, unless they had told him back in them days, you didn't really know anybody what they was or anything, because you didn't have television or radio or nothing.
Well, and they weren't about to tell who they were.
Well, I don't
their
imagine.
business was.
Well, they had been legal in in this area anyway.
Yes.
Nobody could come in and got them at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's quite interesting. And can you tell me anything about your grandmother on the O'Neill side?
Well, I don't know too much about her. All I know that, from what I hear, everybody loved her, and that I think that the day my dad come back from service, she died that day. She didn't get to see him or anything.
Oh, well. Well, now then, let's go back to your childhood when you were a boy. What was your job around the farm?
Well, we was living in town, and actually we didn't have no job. We was poor, but my dad was honest, and he sent us to school, and we used to get any money, we used to have every paper route in Laverne, and every handbill to hand out. And my brother, he was lazy, Harold. He'd take these bills and he'd throw them under a culvert and wouldn't hand them out.
Oh.
But anyway, getting back to the story, we used to run from school every day, and I was a pretty fast runner, so one time I went down there. We'd run behind the stores and pick paperboard boxes up, and we'd sell them to the bakery for 5 cents a piece. So I went down there and I found 3 big boxes of cigars, and so as soon as my brother come there, I went and knocked on, it was back at Del Hotel, and knocked on the door, and I said, you made a mistake, Del, you throwed these cigars out. No, he said, they're real old. He said, you can have them. So anyway, we took these boxes home, and at that time, we had the ice box with a hunk of ice in there, and my dad's face, it lit up like a Christmas tree when he seen all them cigars. So first thing he did, he just pulled that little nail out and got that cellophane and pulled that little nail out and put that box of cigars right on his cake of ice. Well, about 30 minutes, an hour later, you could take that cigar and you could do everything. You couldn't even break it. Before that, you touch them, they'd break. So they had them that horse sale or junk auction there in north of Laverne there, right in town. I don't know, and we took them cigars up there and sold them 2 for a nickel.
And could they smoke them?
Oh yeah, they was good cigars when you bring them back to life.
Oh.
So you get that moisture back in them.
Yes. Well, and you attended school in Laverne.
Well, I went to Laverne to school. I never was interested in school. I was more interested in doing what I shouldn't be doing and going to school. I used to get a whipping every day from either Mr. Gerbil or I think it was Opal Wells, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody else. And I used to wear a stocking cap in the seat of my breeches.
Oh.
But every time I got a whipping at school, if my dad found out with it, I got one at home too.
Well.
I went to the second grade in Laverne,
Uh-huh.
but I think I went to that twice. I don't even remember.
And then where did you go to school? Or did you?
Well, then I might have went to Overstreet before that, or after that. I really don't know. You know, went to Overstreet there for 1 year maybe.
Oh, you did. Mm-hmm. And then when you got out of school, what did you do?
Well, then I went to school, back to school there in California after we moved there. I went to school there for a little while, but times were so hard in California that it was a lot worse than, like I said, we was selling candy in Oklahoma, and when we got to California, why, there was no jobs. And but us kids, we'd caddy at the golf course, and we'd make there's 3 boys, and we'd make $1 to $3 a day.
Yes.
So we didn't even go to school most of the time. We just caddied.
Uh-huh. You was out making some money so you could have something to eat.
Well, yeah, this money we made, we didn't keep any for ourselves. We just took it and gave it to our folks.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we lived, because $3, you know, would buy you a week's supply.
Oh, yes. That $3 would go a long way.
Yeah.
All right, and do you remember, you see, you were born, I forgot to mark it down.
5/25/25.
You don't remember the Depression then?
Oh, yes, I remember it well. I remember that Sunday afternoon when that dirt storm blowed in.
Tell me about it.
Well, we was out of west of Laverne, but I don't know where. All I know, at that time, that guy was a nice, friendly guy, and he always chewed tobacco, and if you didn't watch him, he'd hand you something. I said, I want to give you something, and he'd always have a cut of chewed tobacco. But I don't remember who he is at this time. I don't know whether it could have been Cash Crabtree or not. I don't know. I was named after Cash Crabtree, but I don't know. But anyway, we was out there, and we seen the whole north wall, the whole north sky was just rolling. So we all run in and lit the lamp in the house, and when we got in the house, about that time something happened, and you couldn't even see the light you lit. I don't know, this time I don't know whether the light went out or the light was still burning. But I do know there's about a ½ inch of dust in this house that had come in the house. And all the doors and windows were shut at the time it came in.
And it was so black you couldn't see
You couldn't even see nothing. You couldn't see nothing.
Mm-hmm. And how long did that last? Do you remember?
No, I don't even remember how long it lasted, because it's just something that I didn't even, everybody did, there was no noise going or nothing. I don't know whether people thought it was the end of the world or what. They'd never had anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
The middle afternoon, and then you couldn't see your hand in front of you.
Mm-hmm. And then the World War
II
started. And were you drafted or enlisted?
No, at that time, World War II come along. Well, Frankie, I was living there at Aunt Kate's that time, and Frankie, he had went. And so I volunteered to go, but I decided, well, if I was going to have to go, sooner or later I might as well volunteer and do it, because at that time I felt like that somebody had to stop them. If they didn't, why, they'd be over here.
Mm-hmm.
So we went down to Oklahoma City, me and Kenneth Hagan, and we volunteered in the Seabees, because we could get more money by volunteering than we could anything else.
Mm-hmm. And then you enlisted in Oklahoma City.
Yes, I enlisted in Oklahoma City.
And you and Kenneth, I intended...
Kenneth Hagan.
Yes,
yeah.
I intend to interview Kenneth Hagan some of these days. Where were you sent for your training?
Well, we were sent at Williamsburg, Virginia. Camp Peary, Williamsburg, Virginia.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about your training there.
Well, that was the worst water you ever seen. It was worse than drinking vinegar water. It was real bitter, and it was real hot, maybe 110 degrees, but of course that's what they wanted. They wanted to condition you, you know. And they marched you on that hot blacktop, and you'd march you here and march you there. And then me and Kenneth, we went together so we could be together.
Yes.
And so when we got in there, why, they filled out a battalion. They filled his battalion up, which I believe would have been 1,000 men at that time, and and so I didn't get to go with him.
How come?
Well, see, after they just filled this battalion, and they filled it up before they got to the L's.
Oh, yes.
Filled it up by the H's, and then when they got to the L's, well, it was all full, so then they started another battalion.
I see.
So he, I think, went in the 128th Battalion, Seabees Battalion, Construction Battalion, that is.
And then you were in the next battalion.
Well, I was supposed to be in the next battalion, but I ended up with a spot on my lung, they said, and they sent me to North Fort Naval Hospital in North Fort, Virginia for 30 days. And then after that, well, then they sent me back, and I went through training again, and I believe that at that time then they had a bunch of casualties in some of these other divisions, and they replaced me. I was a replacement.
I see.
But I think it was with the 58th CB Battalion for a while, and the 109th for a while, but I don't know what battalion I was in when I got discharged. I know I was overseas at Guam when I was discharged.
Where were you sent to first?
Well, at first they sent me to Camp Endicott, Rhode Island, from Williamsburg, Virginia. And then they sent me to, we got on a boat at Gulfport, Mississippi, and went through the Panama Canal.
Do you remember the name of the ship? Or?
Yeah, it was the SS Azalea City. There was 8,000 people aboard. And about 3 days out after we, see, I believe that one side of that Panama Canal was Cologne. I think this might have been the lock side, and then the Balboa, no, one or the other was the ocean side. Well, anyway, we got 3 days out in that ocean, and we had we had 8,000 troops on that one ship, and then there was a destroyer and a submarine that was escorting us out. And 3 days out, we got in a hurricane, and our ship just sat out there idle. You know, we washed all the rafts off aboard, and they drowned it out. The water went down the smokestack, and I never did ever see that submarine or the destroyer anymore. I don't know what happened to them. But I know there was no decks, there was no chains or nothing, and the colored people that was doing the cooking at that time, they was taking these meat hooks, and they was catching these 8, 10-foot sharks. The sharks was plumb around this boat, just thick, and they was cutting out their liver, and then they was throwing the sharks back, and there's more sharks. About that time, the old captain come out, and it was all bloody, and he put a stop to that, because what would happen if he hadn't, why, people would have slipped and they'd been feeding them sharks.
And I remember they would have fallen off of the ship?
Oh, yeah, it was real. See, it was still pretty rough seas.
Oh, I see.
And I know not very long, about a day or two after that, well, we had one of the personnel died with a natural death, and anyway, the only where they had to put him, there was no refrigeration on the ships at that time. At least he was in the meat locker, so they had to put him in the meat locker to keep the body. They didn't want to bury it at sea, and nobody would eat meat then, because that body was. And then they buried him. Then when they got to New Hebrides, why they sent his body off the boat, because we didn't get off the boat.
How many days did it take to make that cross?
Well, I think it was about 18 days there on this particular boat ship.
Yeah. All right, tell me about your landing and what your duties were when you got there.
Well, as I say, at that time I was a replacement, and I believe that I went into Guadalcanal to replace. I can't think what I might have been the 58th CV Division, and I do know that there was American boats and ships and everything, and there was about shells on every inch of that island. They really was a battle. You know, it was over with at this time when we landed, but you could tell it was a rough one.
It had been rough. Well, what did you do then?
Well, I can't remember what I did on that island, but pretty soon I was sent on some of them other islands, like, let me see, well, Manus Island, but it's a chain of islands. That ain't really the name of it. Admiralty Island. That's the island Manus was in. And at that time, why, they was using it for a beachhead. It had just been taken over. Some of the islands had been taken over by Americans, and some was still held with the Japs. And we'd have to, when they take these islands over, why, they had to get airstrips so they could strike strike farther up, so you would go into a jungle and you'd run a bulldozer in there, and pretty soon the bulldozers start sinking. And these jungles at that time was made up mostly of coconut trees and a lot of every kind of big hardwood trees, but the coconut trees was pretty easy to get to because they was about 100 foot tall and probably 12 to 15 inches around all the way up. So you'd lay layer one way and layer another way, and then you'd run a cat on them and press them down in the mud and the muck, and then you'd run another layer until you got that to where to hold the cat up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would they'd bring coil in. That's coil that them islands over there, they out in the water itself, they produce coil.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a substance that's white looks like. It looks a lot like caliche, but it's a lot harder than caliche. They had a lot of them coral snakes over there. There's several of the fellows got bit by them, and they die instantly when they get bit by them.
Yes,
not very big snakes.
Mm-hmm. Well, this coil, then, you'd lay that on top of the...
Yeah, you'd pack that on top.
Uh-huh.
You see, a lot of them use mats and stuff, and steel mats later on in the deal to run the planes on, but this time, this is before the steel mats came out.
Mm-hmm. And the planes could land on it?
Yeah, oh yeah, it was hard. They would land on it.
Mm-hmm. How big would these landing places be?
Oh, at that time they would be, can't recall exactly, but it seems like they might have been, 3/4 of a mile by maybe a mile and a half, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of planes would land on them?
Well, I don't really know. We didn't have big planes at that time. It was just all these little bitty planes. We never had there was no big 17s or 24s at that time, mostly. They was, however, later, they extended the base later when they come on.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there was a big PVY base in this area. And at this time, while we was on the garbage detail, and there's a bunch of, they was getting ready to invade another island, and we was going out. My job at that time was to take the garbage out on a platoon barge and dump it out in the ocean, but you'd had to smash every can and take every description off the can so they couldn't tell it was American or not, and then you take it out and dump it. But on the way out one morning, the Japs come in and they bombed these 1 or 2 or 3 of these ammunition ships that was waiting for this deal, and they went, this metal, it just was red hot flying all through the air. And I lost my eardrums. Nobody got hit. I think there's 3 of us on, and we all lost our eardrums, and from the explosion.
Well, you couldn't hear then?
Well, you could hear all right, but your eardrums would, you couldn't actually, the hearing was not right, but you just blowed the drum out and you had a hole in your ear.
Oh.
And then we all got fungus in the ears, and then we had to be sent back stateside.
Yes.
Till they healed up.
Yes.
And I come back, I was in the Frisco hospital there for quite a while, and then I was in the Corpus Christi hospital for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then after that, after your eardrums healed over, what did the government do with you then?
Well, then at that time, then they sent, about that time, I was, the World War II in Europe had just ended, and they sent me on the battleship Texas back to Pearl Harbor to go back to the Pacific again, because that invasion there was still going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I know when the last time I went over was on the battleship Texas, and I got pneumonia. Was laid up at Pearl there for 30 days.
Was that before Pearl Harbor was struck?
No, that was after Pearl Harbor. Yes, it was.
Pearl Harbor. And then where were you sent?
Well, I was sent then to Guam.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And then we went ahead and built more landing scripts at Guam, and that's where I was discharged from at Guam.
Mm-hmm. Did those papers look good to you?
The what?
Did the papers look good to you, your discharge papers?
Well, yeah, I wanted to get home. I was a farm boy, and I wanted to get home. I had a good job offered to me there in Guam for $4 an hour, and that was a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when civilians had come in there and was going to build a big base there.
Mm-hmm. Well, before that, and before you were discharged, what did you do on Guam?
Well, mostly built Quonset huts there for the Air Force, for the Navy Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
We erected Quonset huts, built some runways,
mm-hmm.
and unloaded ships.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Seabees then weren't really in too much danger. They weren't right on the front, were they?
Well, some Seabees were on the first. The first Seabees were on the front lines, the first battalions. I don't know what that'd be from 0 to how many up. But I know this 58 CB battalion that I was a replacement for, they'd have been killed off, and that's why we was replaced. So they were in there. But see, their job actually wasn't to take up a gun and shoot, but they had their guns, and like they'd be in building the bridge or building the road or something, and if the Japs would come out, then they'd have to shoot them, or do something like that. They wasn't designed to shoot; they was designed to build. But you over there at that time, why the Japs, they'd go up in them trees and they'd hide up in them coconut trees, and you couldn't see them. And most of them were dead shots. And for days there, you would bring Americans out of there, and everyone have a headshot. They were that good.
So then it was dangerous to be.
Well, on some of this stuff, yes, some of this stuff there was action on, but.
What wild animals were there on Guam that you had to be careful about?
Well, I don't think at that time there was any wild animals. On every full moon, all them islands over there, when the full moon, you'd be invaded by land crabs, and the land crabs would be about 6 inches around, and they'd be orange looking, and they'd be just about a millions, and they'd get in your shoes and get in your bed and getting everywhere. And you couldn't hardly stand the smell because they'd get run over, and it'd just be just a terrible stink all the time. But that happened about once a month, for about one day a month.
Wow. And they were round animals?
Well, they're land crabs, just like only there's about 5 inches around. 5-inch crabs, a whole bunch of legs with a shell body and legs.
Oh.
There's ocean crabs, what they were.
Well, you didn't eat those?
No. Well, I guess you could have, but you wouldn't nowadays. The people would eat them, yeah, but we didn't then.
Well, that's the first I'd heard of those. Well, that would be quite a thing, and they'd get in your bed too.
Yeah, you'd get everywhere. Oh, there is one thing that happened there. It was on Russell Island. We just shipped in there, and we was in these tents. There's five man to a tent. And about in the middle of the night, me and another fellow had woke up the same time, and the rats would eat every bit of the hard meat off of her heels and her toes. Them pads, the little hard pad calluses.
Yeah.
And they eat every one, and they didn't. When he woke us up, there wasn't a bit left. I don't know how come. And they sent us. We couldn't even walk, so they sent us in and gave us them shots. Lockjaw shots or something. Got about a dozen of them. That was worse than the rats.
And what was it? Ate this?
Rats.
Rats.
They had rats. Them islands had rats bigger than cats over there. And back in the days when they produced them coconut trees, they had a metal strip around the tree, so the rat couldn't get up the tree.
Oh.
But they had been under Jap occupation for quite a while, and the rats had occupied that whole thing.
And there was no way of exterminating them either, I don't suppose.
Well, they were kind of like the Japs. They'd get in a hole and you couldn't get them out.
Did the Japs, after Americans took this island over, were there still Japs?
Oh, you never could get all the Japs off. You never could. They would go underneath the ground, and they'd just hibernate underneath the ground.
They had caves?
Oh, they had coil caves, and if you take a bomb in this coil like we made the runway, you could drop a big bomb and it wouldn't go down 5 feet in this thing. Only one thing you could, for them caves, you had to use the flamethrowers. That was the only thing that would penetrate them.
Well, and do you remember Tokyo Rose? Did you ever hear
Well, we
that?
heard her every day.
Oh, you did?
She was more of a blessing than not, though, because you knew what she was saying was false.
Yes. Did she have a pleasant voice?
Oh, yes, she had a pleasant voice, and she was most of what she did is making remarks about what was your wives and your sweetheart doing back home, and you know what you're doing, what she doing, and just stuff like that to break the morale is what they was after.
Yeah. But they didn't accomplish it, did they?
Well, I'll tell you, nowadays they might have, but back in them days, that's the difference I see between that war and World War II and the Vietnam War. No wars is any good for the human race. It's a bad thing, and someday if they could ever eliminate them, why, that'd be wonderful. But at that time, we'll go on to the subject. In World War II, you went over there to get the job done and come home.
Mm-hmm.
You had the government behind you, you had the people behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam War, you didn't have nobody behind you.
Mm-hmm. Did your boy have to go to Vietnam or
No,
any
he didn't.
war?
He didn't go to Vietnam. He did like I guess many others did. Of course, he was raised as a Jehovah's Witness when he was a baby up, and so he went back to New York to that Jehovah establishment back there, and he didn't go.
Mm-hmm. That group of people doesn't believe in going to. Well, they like the money.
Well, you know, the type of person I am, if I didn't want no part of my kids going to the war or me going to the war, I wouldn't receive the money that the government gave me either.
Mm-hmm. You don't believe in the Jehovah's Witness?
Well, I'm not saying I don't believe in them. I'm just saying, according to the way I read the Bible, that Jesus, if you don't go through Jesus, you got to go through Jesus where you go to God.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't believe that way.
Oh, they don't?
No. To my knowledge, they don't believe that way.
Well, okay. Is there anything else you thought of that we haven't mentioned? Let's get back to that island where the coral snakes were. Describe a coral snake for me.
Well, he's just a little bitty, real colored snake. Not very long, but real quick.
And does it have black and red circles?
Well, it's got little circles, but it's been so long ago now. It's been, I don't know, 30, 40 years probably, and I can't,
You can't remember.
I can't remember really what.
Mm-hmm. Did any of your particular friends, get bit by them, or did you lose any friends while you were?
Well, I lost friends, but I don't know what it was from at this time. You know what I mean?
You've forgotten. Okay. And it was at Guam that they give you your discharge?
Yeah, I was discharged at Guam, yeah.
Well, how come?
Well, I mean, I was not a discharge, but see, they went on points, and I had my points there at Guam, and so then we came back to San Diego, and then they put us on cattle cars, regular slatted cattle cars. Had a stove in the middle and slats just like the cattle, and we rode that to Norman. I got discharged at Norman.
Let's see, I thought of something I was going to ask you now, I forgot. Well, these, here at, well, I can't think. I can't think what was I was going to ask you. I was so surprised when you told me that they put you on those cattle cars.
Yeah, it was a regular
bring you
cattle car.
back.
Regular cattle car.
Well, and you were out in the weather all that time.
Well, no, you wasn't really in the weather. It had a solid top on it, and then it just had board slats.
Yeah. Was that in the winter time?
No, it was in March.
Oh.
They had a coal stove, I believe, in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you just got to come home, and you didn't care. You were never going to freeze anyway, so you're home.
That's right. Then they fed you in those cars.
I don't know whether we got fed in the cars, or I believe like we stopped the rail. They just stopped the train so often, and we eat at a Harvey house. I don't remember at this time how that happened, what we did.
Well, how many would be in a car?
Well, I can't remember that, but I think there's probably around 50 of us.
It would be pretty crowded, wouldn't it?
But we didn't have no chairs or nothing like that.
You had to stand up?
Well, no, you could sit down or
Or you
stand up.
sit
They had
on the
hay.
floor?
They had hay, but I don't know what they did around that stove. I never could ever figure that out. How far away was the stove from the hay,
You weren't ill when you came home. You
No,
was over all your...
No, I just had my points, and they let you out by points.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Explain the point system.
Well, probably the oldest people that was in the war was probably 40 or 45 years old at that time. And the age carried so many points with it. If you was married, carried so many points with it. Length of service, I believe, carried so many points with it. Length of overseas carried so many points with it. And then the fellow, if he had to, when he first started discharging, the people, I believe, the married people with kids, they were the first out. And I know I was single. I was not quite 21, but I think I was 20 when I got out. And so I was in about, I think, 32 or 33 months total time. Overseas, I'd say most of the time.
Did you ever see Kenneth Hagan again?
No, I didn't see him in service. I seen one of the Johnson boys. One that lived in New York. Running into him at the hospital in Frisco.
That'd be Joe.
Joe, yeah, running into him at Frisco.
Oh,
And then I seen Wayne I seen Wayne Armstrong. He was in CB camp out there in Frisco, and that's the only two I've seen.
Well,
I would like to jump the ship if it hadn't. They sent us one time from back east to through Shattuck to Frisco, and it stopped for water here there at Shattuck. And I thought about jumping. I mean, I'd like to jump, but I knew better than to jump, so I didn't jump.
You didn't know they were going to bring you through Shattuck?
Well, no, you didn't know anything till they didn't let you know nothing.
So you couldn't let your folks here at Laverne know, and they couldn't come and see you?
No, you didn't know nothing. We had, at that time, you had strict orders, and they'd shoot you just as soon as look at them. And whenever that order, when they quit shooting you, if you did something wrong, then they had no more control over you.
Well, you told me when we were visiting about a brother that came to see you, or...
Yeah, that was Steve LaMunyon, and he was in the 5th Air Force headquarters. He was a cook for General Whitehead, and he was a real good cook, I guess. And so General Whitehead would send him with a pilot, and they'd go down to Australia and New Zealand and bring back supplies, food supplies. So one time he came over there to see me, and so he got over there where I was at. I didn't know he was coming or anything, and anyway, so he had to leave the next day. So there was a ferry boat there, or a boat, and so we went down. We went over there to meet his plane, and when he left, why, I went to this ferry and tried to get back, and they'd been to run once a day.
But you did get to visit your brother.
Yeah.
That was after you.
Yeah. And so when it started, so I went back and tried to get this ferry, and it didn't run, so I had to get back because I'd be AWOL, and they'd shoot you. And so, well, and I had it coming because I didn't tell nobody I was leaving, you know. And so I found it was about 5 miles back across there with all water, and there's an old native canoe there. It was 3 logs, and there was 2 little logs and 1 big log, and the big log had been hollowed out. It was all tied together with a bow or a stick. Anyway, I got out about in the middle, and here come a oil tanker down through there, and he didn't pay no attention to me, and when he passed, he had about a foot wake, and that foot wake went over in that thing and just tore it all apart. And there I was, had about a mile or 2 miles yet to go.
And what did you do?
Well, I thought I was a goner because there's a lot of sharks and stuff in there, and I really paddled for shore.
And did they discover your absence?
No, they didn't ever discover I was absent or anything.
And you got back?
Yeah, got back.
And wasn't reprimanded?
No.
Well, you were lucky.
Well, I should have been, but nobody knew it.
Well, how come you didn't tell them that your brother is coming?
Well, they wouldn't let you in.
Oh, they wouldn't let you go?
Oh, no,
Why?
Well, they was running the military-wise, you know what.
Oh. And they didn't care whether you and your brother got to visit
Oh, no,
or
that
not.
was, you know, there was a war to fight, and that's what they was...
Okay. Now let's go back to Oklahoma City. When you got off of this car
And got this...
and got discharged, what did you do?
Well, I just hitchhiked a ride out there to the farm there
In Laverne?
in Laverne.
And then what did you do? You went to work or
Well, I
farming?
stayed there with drove Yates and Florence Yates for a while and just messed around. And then I eventually, so I went to work for T.R. Laverne for a while, and then I went to work at Wichita then in 52. Worked there till about 58.
And you married?
Yes, I married Irene Stevens there at Follette.
And was that before you went to Wichita?
Yes, that was before I went to, that was in 40, that was at Christmas, I think, at 47 or 8.
And what did you do in Wichita?
Well, I worked at Boeing, building airplanes.
Did you like that work?
Yeah, I liked it real well.
What part of the plane did you work on?
Well, I was testing. I was testing injection seats and landing gears and outriggers and stuff that was electrical and mechanical to it.
And you and Irene had 2 children?
Yes, we had 2 children. A boy, his name was Mike Earl, and he was born in July of 1949. And then Carolyn Louise, she was born the 12th of December, 1950.
And then you and Irene separated?
Yeah, we separated in about 58.
And then what did you do?
Well, after we separated, then I went to California then to work for my brothers.
In what type of work?
Well, they was doing painting and drywall and on houses at that time. California was booming, and they was doing them by the thousands.
Do you like to paint?
Well, I didn't like to paint, but it paid good money.
And then you married again?
Yes, I married again. Then I married Ruth Christine Snow at that time, and she had 4 kids, and we stayed there at California for about 5 years, I guess, and then I went up in Oregon about in 65, 66 somewhere.
And what did you do up
Well,
there?
I painted there for a while for myself, and then I finally got a job at a place called Wah Chang. And what they did, Wah Chang did, they made it was a rare deal. It was the federal government was behind them, and they was experimenting on making metal out of sand. And so what they did at that time, they would take this sand. At that time, they was getting Australia beach sand, just regular sand from the beach, and they was taking it, cooking it, and putting coke and chlorine gas with it, and they was getting rare metals, space-age metals out of this. One of the metals was called columbium, and they got hafnium, and they got tantalum, and then they had a lot of tungsten. And this metal, it would never you could lay it out, and it'll never rust or never tarnish, and it'll turn a lot of heat. And they use that to the moon. They use that on these rockets they go to the moon with, that the people are in.
Oh.
Now they also use this as a fuel. You grind this up, and it'll burn. And what most of all this columbium and tantalum and zirc, that's used to store radiation in for our ships and our nuclear power plants. It's a tube that it won't counteract this stuff. It holds it in. And now in the last 5 years, they got a hold of a new deal out of that sand. It's called columbium. Now, like if you went from across the world, at each side you pull a hair off your head, we'd say, and this wire, if you can make it as thin as that hair, it would send a current one side. It'll go plumb across the world, plumb around the world, and won't lose any of the current. But it's real expensive to manufacture.
Yes.
And it comes from beach sand.
From beach sand? And
right now they're getting their beach sand from Florida.
well, and that's what you've been working in?
Well, I've been painting the acids and the process that they get this. Why, if you buy a brand new, say you buy a pump, they use a lot of pumps to pump fluids and material, and if you don't put special paint on them, why in a week, they be completely eat up from acid. So you have to paint them, and that's what I've been doing. I did that for 17 years.
Well, did that injure your health? And
well, I got the chemicals out of the paint, and And I got asthma, industrial asthma there for about 4 years. Finally got rid of it. Had to quit painting and everything. Finally got rid of it.
Well, I'm glad that we've had this visit today, Cash. I've learned a lot. Things that I'd never heard before, and just what you just now told us has been quite interesting.
Well, you look back, you know, and
You mentioned, Cash, about the coral that you used. Tell me about it.
well, it's the same thing that I guess it's all over the South Pacific, like them coral reefs, you know, that when them ships would run into. Sometimes there wouldn't be a reef there, and then sometimes they would. This coral, to my knowledge, it grows. It's like the moss, or it's like a fungus. It grows, and if you take it out, and it'll reproduce itself.
Take it out.
Well,
out of the water?
we used to blast it and stuff like that, and have clamshells and stuff to get it with. Yeah.
And it would grow out of the water then.
Well, some of it would come out of the water, some would be underneath the water, some would be out of the water. Most of all them islands in the Pacific is made out of coral.
What do they grow on the islands?
Well, they got some of the prettiest trees you ever seen on them islands. They're big trees, and they're mostly hardwood trees. They got some balsa wood trees, but they got ironwood trees. Now, ironwood tree makes the beautiful. It's so hard. A lot of them would just carve ashtrays out of them. I don't even remember now what they did. It was so hard. And then they have a lot of mahogany. Mahogany is a nice looking tree. But over there, it's mostly that junk. Every day it rained about, in the afternoon you'd get 2 to 4 inches of rain every afternoon, and about 10 minutes later you couldn't see a drop of water laying around. It would all drain off.
And was it hot?
Well, it would be real hot just before it rained, and then it would cool off. It was right on the equator where it was at.
Yes.
The jungle was real pretty because it had every kind of bird in it, parrots and every kind of bird you ever seen in the jungle.
Well, and did they have snakes?
Well, there were snakes there, but they didn't bother us. Only the coral snakes. They're the only one that actually bothered us.
Do you remember the name of the snake that John told us about? There on Okinawa.
We had a lot of pythons. That's the ones that swallowed you, very big ones.
I was trying to think. Habu.
Yeah, habu snake. Did you ever have those?
Not that I know of, you know.
That's an Okinawa. And they'd have the way of entertainment. They'd have fights between habu and little animal. What are they?
Mongoose or what?
Mongoose.
Yeah.
Did they have mongooses there?
Well, they probably did, but just like I say, it's been so long that a lot of this I don't really remember anymore.
So he had a picture he took of it.
Where?
But,
Okay. Finish it.
This man that handles a mongoose, you know, and put them in a cage together.
oh,
He took a picture of him one day, and the next day he got bit, and he died.
I do know over there that on them islands, you know, a person, he can live on just about any kind of food. But them natives over there, they would, there was something called a beetle nut. And every one of them would chew it, the young girls and the old man and all, and their teeth would be red and their lips would be red and everything. And I don't know what they must have had a real rough time after the war, because, you know, they'd be a line out of Americans. We was the most wasteful people in the world, and we'd have garbage can after garbage can of food we'd thrown away, and they'd be out there lined up eating that just like just you know, they'd eat it with their hands, they're fighting over it. And after the war was over, well, I wonder what them people did, because they wasn't used to food.
Well, what did they eat?
Well, probably roots. I imagine they had a few pigs and stuff like that, but mostly roots and stuff.
Were they big people?
Well, there'd be some big people. Most of them was on the little side because they was undernourishment. They all had big stomachs on them, you know. They only weared they didn't wear nothing from the waist up, no man or women, neither one. They just usually had a weaved an old grass skirt, and that's what they wore.
Well, excuse me, they couldn't get any material, could they? Or
Well, they didn't know what material was at that time. No,
they didn't.
they got the material from when the GIs was over there. They'd get material from them, but they didn't want clothes. There was a lot of clothes sort of way, but they didn't want clothes. They just wanted something to wrap around them.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of houses did they live in?
Well, they just had little old grass huts,
Mm-hmm.
just a grass hut.
And no sanitation at all?
Oh no sanitation. I know the first time I went over there, a lot of people say I'm crazy, but this actually happened. I've seen it with my own eyes. There's a little old grass hut, and there's a woman. You can't tell how old they was, but they don't have no. Just like I said before, they don't have no cover from the waist up. And this woman, she had over there. If a woman had child, why her breast would be about 2 foot long and about 2 to 3 inches around. And anyway, this one woman, she had one breast thrown over her shoulder, and then there was a little kid standing up sucking on that one, and she was sitting down, and it was pig sucking on the other one.
Wow.
And they raised these animals because that damn pigs, was their life.
Yes, that was important. And you saw that?
Yes, ma'am. And then they had at that same time they had a mosquito that would give you elephantitis, and you would see human beings over there that would, you'd see a leg, and one leg would be bigger than the body. You just swell up. Elephantitis is called.
Well, how did the Army fight them?
Well, we was all vaccinated with about 24 or 40 shots before we ever went over.
I see. So when mosquitoes bit you, what they didn't fight?
Well, they made us take Atabrine. It was real bitter, and they made you take them every day. You couldn't get your food till you had your Atabrine tablet, and they stayed right there and made you put them in your mouth. They couldn't tell whether you swallowed or not. They made you put them in your mouth.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was for your own good.
Yeah, that was right. It was for your own good.
And then what about when it would rain every day? Would you boys be out in that rain?
Oh yeah, you never stopped. Rain didn't stop you. You had a job to do, and you'd do it.
And then when the rain would be over, your clothing would dry?
You'd be dry in 5 minutes after it got wet.
What about your shoes? What type of shoes would you wear?
Well, they were just regular shoes.
Just regular Army
Yeah.
issue.
Usually you wouldn't get water on them because they made you put stuff on the outsides of them,
Oh.
Put the oils and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And was it rocky? Was the soil rocky?
No, there really was no soil there that I ever seen. Most of it, there might have been. It was, like I say, they had coconut trees and stuff, but from what I can recall now, I think that was it was from the leaves and stuff that fell off, and the vegetation and the roots and stuff of the trees was growing right on top of the coil.
Oh,
Well, now I might be wrong at this time, but I don't think I am.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
They just practically grow on top of the rock.
Well, you see, you got enough moisture there to take care of, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have years and years of that vegetation falling off.
Yes. And that would feed the roots. Well, did you ever see any Jap planes on your trips back and forth on the ocean? Did you ever
Oh
get
yeah,
bombed?
we've seen a lot of Japs. The only time, like I said before, that we got bombed was when they blew up them ammunition ships and busted my eardrums.
Mm-hmm.
But they would come over every day and bomb me.
And what would you do?
You wouldn't do nothing. You just keep going on.
Just keep on working just so they weren't there.
They usually at this time, you see, we was back behind the outpost, where we weren't right on the front line. See, we was building these bases so that they could get on the front line. See, we just had the head chop during the war because we didn't have no airplanes that would go any distance.
Mm-hmm. And they would be bombing the front lines, and
Right.
you were behind the front lines. I see.
Yeah, the way that war was over there, to what I remember of it, they would go in and they would just secure an island enough to get you to go in and put down a landing strip, but there'd still be Japs on it, but they wouldn't be causing too much trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you'd knocked out most of their heavy firepower,
Mm-hmm.
and so then you would go on and go on and on.
I see. Okay. Is there anything else you can think of?
No, I don't think so.
After we close this, we'll think of something else.
Probably.
Okay, thank you, Kay.